Anya of the Silvermoon Pack was a living ghost, a whisper of a girl in a world that roared. She was a shifter who could not shift, a wolf without a wolf. In their society, built on the bedrock of strength, dominance, and the sacred bond with one's inner beast, she was a flaw, a broken thing. The shame of it clung to her like a second skin, heavier than any cloak. Her family bore her existence as a quiet, constant humiliation, a stain on their once proud name. Today, that humiliation was particularly sharp, scented with the pine and damp earth of the coming royal hunt. Her sister, Serafina, was the family's redemption. Everything Anya was not. Serafina was in glorious abundance. Her wolf was a magnificent silver creature, swift and strong. Her laughter was full and confident, her movements graceful. She was currently being fitted for a new leather jerkin, the centerpiece of the family's hopes. Anya watched from the doorway of the small room, feeling as substantial as a shadow. "Hold still, child," their mother, Mara, murmured, her fingers deftly lacing the sides of the garment. Her tone was soft, but laced with a tension that had been a permanent resident in their home for years. "The Alpha King's court will be watching. You must be perfect." Serafina glanced at Anya, her bright eyes softening with a familiar pity that was almost worse than scorn. "It will be fine, mother." "Anya, do you think the green trim is too much?" Anya offered a small, hesitant smile. "It brings out the color of your eyes," she said, her voice barely a murmur. It was true. Serafina was beautiful, a perfect alpha female in the making. Their father, Ronan, entered the room, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. He was a man carved from granite and disappointment, and his gaze always seemed to slide right past Anya, as if she were too insignificant to register. He looked only at Serafina. "The emissaries from the king's retinue have arrived. They say King Cassian himself will preside over the opening ceremony." A tremor of nervous excitement went through the room. The Alpha King was a figure of terrifying legend, the Shadow King, a ruler so powerful and reclusive he was more myth than man. Ronan's eyes finally reluctantly landed on Anya. The familiar sneer tightened his lips. "Keep her out of sight," he commanded Mara, not even addressing Anya directly. "Her presence will only bring us shame." The words were not new, but they struck their mark with the precision of a well-aimed arrow. A cold hollowness opened in Anya's chest. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the very floorboards. She backed away from the doorway, her throat tight. I was just going for a walk." "Stay within the denlands," her mother said, her back still to her. It was a dismissal. Anya fled. She fled the suffocating weight of their hopes for Serafina and their despair over her. The path behind their home led toward the edge of their territory, a place that bordered the vast, forbidden expanse of the king's royal woods. No one was permitted to enter. It was the Alpha King's private domain, and the rumors said it was guarded by more than just sentries. But the air was cleaner here, away from the judgment in her father's eyes. She walked until the sounds of her family's home faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Her one secret, the only thing of value she possessed, pulsed faintly under her skin, a warmth in her palms, a quiet hum in her blood. It was a strange, soft power, a gift for mending. A fledgling bird with a broken wing, a sapling split by lightning, she could soothe their pain. Knit them back together with a gentle touch and a whispered plea to the life force that flowed through all things. She never told anyone. They already thought her unnatural for being wolfless. A strange magic would only confirm their fears. She would be branded a witch, an outcast in truth. The great ancient trees of the royal woods loomed ahead, their branches like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. A sense of foreboding emanated from them, a palpable warning. But today, the sting of her father's words was sharper than any fear. She wanted only to be somewhere she did not belong, because she felt she belonged nowhere else. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Anya stepped over the line of moss-covered stones that marked the boundary. She broke the law with a single, silent step, and the world did not end. The woods were quiet, unnervingly so, a cathedral of shadow and silence. She walked deeper, losing herself in the gloom. The air grew colder, heavier. It was then she heard it, a low, pained groan, the sound of immense suffering. It was followed by the sharp, metallic clank of a chain. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct, every story she'd ever been told, screamed at her to run. But the sound of pain was a hook in her soul. It was the one call she could never ignore. Moving cautiously, she pushed aside a thick fern and peered into a small clearing. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. There, caught in the jaws of a cruel, silver-laced trap, was a wolf. But it was unlike any wolf she had ever seen. Colossal. A beast of nightmare and legend, its fur the color of a starless midnight sky. Its massive body was heaving, and a dark pool of blood was spreading on the forest floor, from a deep gash in its powerful front leg. The raw, burning scent of silver filled the air, a poison to their kind. Terror seized her, cold and absolute. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a primal force, a creature of immense power. It turned its head, and its eyes, the color of molten gold, locked onto her. There was no feral madness in them, but a blazing, intelligent agony that struck her to the core. It didn't snarl or lunge. It simply watched her, its breath coming in ragged, painful pants. She should have run. Her father's voice echoed in her head, calling her a fool, a useless thing who would get herself killed. But the pain in those golden eyes held her fast. It was a pain she understood, the agony of being trapped, wounded, and alone. I won't hurt you, she whispered, the words trembling in the air. The great wolf huffed, a sound of bitter disbelief, and winced as the movement pulled at the silver teeth clamped on its leg. Anya's fear was a roaring inferno, but her compassion was a deeper, stronger river. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. The secret warmth in her palms began to glow, a tingling hum that begged for release. This was madness. Helping a strange, monstrous wolf in the forbidden woods. But what did she have to lose? Her life was already a half-life. She knelt in the damp earth, a few feet from the massive creature. "Please," she said softly, holding out her hands, palms up. "Let me help." The wolf watched her, its gaze sharp and assessing. It seemed to understand her intent. Slowly, with a groan of profound effort, it lowered its head to the ground in a gesture of reluctant acceptance. Her heart thudding. Anya crawled closer. The sheer scale of him was terrifying. His head was as large as her torso. The scent of his blood, of his power, and of the burning silver was dizzying. She reached out a trembling hand, not to the wound, but to his broad, magnificent head, stroking the dark fur between his ears. It was coarse, but strangely soft beneath her fingers. A low rumble started deep in his chest, not a growl of aggression, but something else entirely. Then she moved her hands to the wound. The trap was a brutal thing, its silver edges searing his flesh. Without thinking, she closed her eyes and let her gift flow. The warmth in her palms intensified into a soft, golden light. It poured from her fingertips into the wolf's torn flesh. She felt the shiver that ran through his massive frame, a jolt of shock. The light enveloped the wound, and under her touch, she felt the mangled tissues begin to knit together. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. The silver's poison was purged by her light, its burning hiss silenced. She didn't know how long she knelt there, pouring her essence into him. It was draining, leaving her feeling hollowed out and dizzy. But she didn't stop until the wound was closed, leaving behind only a raw, pink scar and the mangled metal of the trap. With a final desperate push of her will, she focused her energy on the trap's spring mechanism. The metal groaned, protesting. Then, with a loud snap, the jaws sprang open. The wolf heaved a great sigh of relief and pulled its leg free. It lay there for a moment, panting, before struggling to its feet. It stood over her, a mountain of dark fur and muscle, and for a terrifying second, she thought it would turn on her. Instead, it lowered its head and nudged her shoulder with its nose, a gesture so gentle it made her want to weep. Then, it looked at her one last time, its golden eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't name, before turning and melting into the shadows of the forest, silent as a phantom. Anya collapsed back onto the damp earth, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had healed a monster in the Forbidden Woods, Qualichairable, and she had a terrible, thrilling feeling that her quiet, invisible life was over. The following morning, a brittle tension blanketed the Silvermoon den. Anya had returned home unnoticed, slipping into her bed with the scent of blood and strange magic clinging to her clothes. She felt drained, yet a strange current of energy buzzed beneath her skin, a lingering echo of the power she had used and the creature she had touched. She said nothing of her transgression, burying the secret deep within her. They were in the main hall when the royal guards arrived. They did not come with the polite deference of emissaries. They came with the unyielding force of a king's will. Two towering shifters in polished black armor stamped into the hall, their expressions grim. Behind them, flanked by 4 more guards, was a man whose presence consumed all the air in the room. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his immaculate black tunic. His hair was as dark as the wolf's fur, and his eyes were the same shade of molten gold. They swept the room with an unnerving intensity, missing nothing. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a pale white line against his stern, handsome features. This was King Cassian, the Shadow King. He was no myth, he was terrifyingly real. Her father, Ronan, fell to one knee instantly, his face pale with shock. "Your Majesty," he stammered, "we are honored. We did not expect." Cassian's golden gaze cut him off. He didn't look at Ronan, or Mara, or the beautiful, trembling Seraphina. His eyes scanned the room and landed directly on Anya, who stood half-hidden behind a tapestry, wishing the threads would unravel and swallow her whole. The moment his gaze met hers, a jolt went through her, electric and hot. It was a shock of recognition, a phantom touch against her skin. He knew. He had to know. "You," the king said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated in her bones. He lifted a single finger and pointed directly at her. "Step forward." Every head turned. Her father's face was a mask of horror and disbelief. Seraphina looked utterly bewildered. Anya felt frozen, pinned by the weight of his stare. One of the guards took a menacing step toward her, and she forced her trembling legs to move. She walked into the center of the room, her head bowed, her hands clenched at her sides. She felt like a lamb being presented for slaughter. "This one?" Ronan asked, his voice cracking with confusion. "Your Majesty, she is nothing. A wolfless. My other daughter, Seraphina." "I was not speaking to you," Cassian said, his tone dropping to a dangerous chill that silenced Ronan instantly. The king's eyes never left Anya. He took a slow step toward her, circling her like a predator assessing its prey. She could smell the scent of pine and cold stone on him, the scent of power. It was undercut by something else, something familiar, the faint, lingering scent of his own blood. "Last night," he began, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "a trap was sprung in my woods, a silver-laced trap, intended for me." Anya's blood ran cold, intended for him. The trap hadn't been an accident, it had been an assassination attempt. And the wolf? The wolf was the king himself. "Trespassing in the royal woods is a crime punishable by death," he continued, his voice hardening. "And interfering with the king's justice is an even greater one." She risked a glance up at him. His face was an unreadable mask of cold authority, but his eyes held a flicker of something else. The same raw, intelligent light she had seen in the wolf's gaze. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice shaking. I was only—" "You were only what?" he pressed, his proximity overwhelming. "Healing a creature you should have fled from? Using a magic you have no right to possess?" Panic clawed at her throat. He knew everything. Stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out and, with a startling gentleness, took her hand. Her breath hitched, his touch was like lightning. He turned her palm upward, his thumb brushing over the center where her power emanated. "Where did you learn this?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. I don't know," she stammered truthfully. "I've always been able to." "She is a worthless girl, my lord." Ronan suddenly burst out, scrambling to his feet in desperation. She is a disgrace to my line. Take my other daughter. Seraphina is strong. A true alpha female. This one. This one is broken. King Cassian's head snapped up, and he fixed Ronan with a glare so potent, so filled with lethal promise, that her father physically recoiled as if struck. You will be silent, the king commanded, his voice ringing with absolute power. Or I will silence you permanently. He turned his attention back to Anya, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Broken things can be the most useful, he murmured, more to himself than to her. He then raised his voice to address the room. Anya of Silvermoon has broken my law. Her punishment will be servitude. She will come with me to the citadel now and serve at my pleasure. A collective gasp went through the room. Servitude at the royal citadel was a grim fate, but servitude at the king's personal pleasure was a death sentence. The rumors about his cruelty, his tempers, were infamous. Mara let out a choked sob, while Seraphina stared, her face ashen. Ronan looked from Anya to the king, a flicker of something awful in his eyes. Not concern, but a dawning, greedy realization that his worthless daughter had somehow caught the king's attention. As you command, your majesty, her father said, bowing low. He did not protest. He did not defend her. He offered her up without a second thought. The betrayal was a sharp, physical pain, but it was so familiar that it had lost its edge. It was simply the way things were. Pack none of your belongings, the king commanded her. You will not need them. He released her hand, and the loss of his touch left her skin feeling cold. He turned and strode from the hall without a backward glance, his guards falling into formation around him. Two remained behind, their imposing figures flanking Anya. One of them gestured curtly toward the door. It was time to go. She took one last look at her family. Her father was already talking to her mother in a low, excited hiss, likely calculating the potential advantage of this disaster. Seraphina met her eyes, her own filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. Anya turned her back on the only home she had ever known, and walked out into the cold morning air, a prisoner of the very man whose life she had saved. She was being taken to the heart of the kingdom, the Shadow King's fortress, a place from which no one was said to return unchanged. For the first time in her life, she felt not just shame or sadness, but a terrifying, razor-sharp spike of fear. The royal citadel was a fortress of black stone and sharp angles, a crown of jagged peaks that pierced the sky. It seemed to have been clawed from the mountain itself, a monument to power and isolation. As Anya was escorted through its massive gates, the sounds of the outside world died, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the stone. The air within the walls was cold, still, and carried the faint metallic scent of old magic and secrets. She was not taken to the dungeons, as she had feared, nor to the servants' quarters. Instead, she was led through echoing halls, past armored guards who stood as motionless as statues, their faces hidden behind visored helms. They climbed a winding staircase that seemed to ascend into the very heart of the citadel's main spire. Finally, her escort stopped before a pair of immense, iron-bound doors. "Ka, the king's private wing," one of the guards grunted. "You will remain here. You will not leave unless summoned. You will not speak unless spoken to. The king's beta, Gideon, will instruct you." With that, they opened the doors, nudged her inside, and closed them behind her with a boom that sealed her fate. The chambers were vast and opulent, but profoundly lonely. A huge fireplace dominated one wall, its embers glowing sullenly. Books were piled high on every surface, their leather spines cracked with age. A massive table was strewn with maps and strategic markers. It was a room of work and solitude, not comfort. Through an archway, she could see a bedroom, dominated by a large, unmade bed. The entire space smelled of him, of pine, cold, stone, and that unique, wild scent of his power. She stood frozen in the center of the room, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She was a prisoner in the gilded cage of the most feared man in the kingdom. What did he want from her? Hours passed. No one came. The sun began to set, painting the room in shades of blood and twilight through the tall, arched windows. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but fear was a more potent force. She didn't dare move, didn't dare touch anything. A different door opened, and a man entered who was not the king. He was older, with a stern, weathered face and gray-streaked hair. His eyes, however, were sharp and intelligent, and they assessed her with a startling quickness. This must be Gideon, the king's beta. "You're the girl from the woods," he said, his voice a low gravel. It wasn't a question. Anya simply nodded, unable to find her voice. Gideon sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He gestured to a small tray of food on a side table she hadn't noticed. "The king commanded you be fed. Eat." She hesitated. "It is not poisoned," he said, a flicker of dry humor in his eyes. "Though given your situation, I can understand the suspicion. Eat. You are no use to him starved, no use to him." The words sent a chill through her. She was a tool, a thing to be used. She forced herself to move to the tray and eat the bread and cheese, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them. Gideon watched her, his expression unreadable. "The king is complicated," he said finally. "He is not the monster the stories claim, but he carries a heavy burden. Your presence here is irregular. It is dangerous. For you, and for him." "What does he want from me?" she asked, her voice small. "I believe he is trying to answer that question himself," Gideon replied cryptically. "He senses something in you. The magic you used, it is old, wild, not of the pack." Before she could respond, the main doors opened again, and King Cassian swept into the room. He had shed his formal tunic for a simple black shirt that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been that morning. He ignored Gideon completely, his golden eyes fixing on Anya. "Leave us," he commanded his beta. Gideon gave Anya one last warning look before bowing and exiting the room, closing the door softly behind him. The silence that fell was heavy and charged. Cassian moved to the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. "The council is in an uproar," he said, his back to her. "My uncle, Lord Vorlag, believes I should have had you executed on the spot for trespassing. He says your presence here shows weakness." Anya's stomach twisted. His uncle. She had heard the name. A cruel, ambitious man who commanded the king's armies. Why didn't you?" she asked, her courage a flickering candle flame. He turned slowly, his gaze intense. "Because for the first time in 10 years, I slept through the night without pain." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Anya stared at him, bewildered. "The silver trap was laced with more than just silver," he explained, his voice rough with a pain she was beginning to recognize. "A poison. A curse. It was meant to aggravate my condition. To push me over the edge." He gestured vaguely at his own body. "Your magic. It did not just heal the wound. It soothed something deeper. Something that has been burning me alive for a decade." He took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "What are you, little healer?" "I am Anya," she said, finding a sliver of strength. "I am wolfless." A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. "You are more than that. I felt it. A light, a warmth that fought back the shadows." He paused, his expression turning grim. "Pah. The shadows always return. And they are growing stronger." Over the next few days, a strange routine began to form. Anya was confined to his chambers, a silent observer of his life. She saw the king, the warrior, the politician. She watched him command his generals with unyielding authority, saw him pore over maps late into the night, the weight of his kingdom resting squarely on his shoulders. But she also saw the man. She saw the profound loneliness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching, and she saw his pain. It came upon him without warning. Sometimes it was a subtle tremor in his hands, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Other times, it was a crippling wave that would make him stagger, his breath catching in a pained gasp. He would retreat to his rooms, locking the door, and she would hear low groans of agony from within. She knew, instinctively, that this was his condition, the curse. He never asked for her help directly. But on the third night, when a particularly bad spell took him, he left the bedroom door ajar. She found him slumped in a chair, his face pale, his body rigid with pain. "Read to me," he rasped, his eyes squeezed shut. He gestured to one of the many books. Hesitantly, she took a book of old legends, and sat in a chair across from him. Her voice was unsteady at first, but as she read the ancient words, she felt the familiar warmth begin to hum in her blood. She didn't consciously direct it, but it seemed to flow from her with her voice, a gentle, soothing energy that filled the space between them. She read for hours, her voice growing hoarse, until his breathing evened out and the tension left his body. He had fallen asleep in his chair, looking younger, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. This became their ritual. When the pain came, she would read. Her presence, her voice, her latent magic, it was embalmed to his cursed soul. He began to talk to her, not about his secrets, but about small things. The books he loved, the histories of his people, the frustrations of his court. He discovered she had a quick mind and a quiet wit. He started to look at her not as a prisoner or a tool, but as Anya. One evening, as she was replacing a book on a high shelf, her foot slipped on the stool. She cried out as she fell, but before she could hit the floor, a blur of motion caught her. Cassian was there, his strong arms wrapped around her, holding her securely against his chest. Her head was tucked under his chin, her hands pressed against the hard wall of his torso. His heart was hammering a powerful, steady rhythm against her ear. The world seemed to stop. She could feel the raw strength in him, the heat of his body. She lifted her head, and her eyes met his. They were only inches apart. The gold in his irises was burning, and for the first time, she saw not just pain or authority, but a fierce, possessive hunger that made her breath catch. A current arced between them, potent and undeniable. He was the king, she was his wolfless prisoner. But in that moment, they were just a man and a woman, caught in a gravity too strong to resist. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to her lips, and for a dizzying second, she thought he was going to kiss her. The moment was shattered by a sharp knock on the door. "Your Majesty?" Gideon's voice called out, laced with urgency. "Lord Vorlag requests an audience. He says it is a matter of state security." Cassian flinched as if doused with cold water. He instantly released her, stepping back, the mask of the cold, remote king slamming back into place. The warmth between them vanished, leaving Anya feeling chilled and strangely bereft. The threat of his uncle, of the outside world, had intruded on their sanctuary, and she knew, with a sinking heart, that their fragile peace was about to be broken. Lord Vorlag was a man who moved with the predatory grace of a seasoned wolf, but whose eyes held the cold, calculating stillness of a snake. He was older than Cassian, his dark hair threaded with silver, his face a roadmap of old battles and political schemes. When he entered the king's chambers, his sharp gaze swept past Cassian and landed on Anya with undisguised contempt. "Nephew," Vorlag said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "I see you are still entertaining your pet." Cassian moved to stand between Anya and his uncle. A subtle but deeply protective gesture. "She is here at my command. Vorlag, state your business." Vorlag's smile was thin and unpleasant. "Business of state is precisely why I am here. There are whispers in the court, rumors, that the king has lost his mind, that he sequesters himself in his rooms with a wolfless stray, while the kingdom's enemies gather at our borders. My military strategies are not determined by court gossip," Cassian retorted, his voice like ice. "Perhaps they should be," Vorlag countered, taking a step closer. "The border lords are growing restless. They say the Shadow King has become just that, a shadow. They question your strength. They wonder if the curse of your bloodline has finally taken root." At the word curse, the air in the room crackled with tension. Anya saw Cassian's hands clench into fists at his sides. The pain was never far from the surface, and Vorlag, it seemed, knew exactly which wounds to press. "My strength is not in question," Cassian growled, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Then prove it." Vorlag's voice rose, shedding its silky veneer to reveal the raw ambition beneath. "The solstice festival is in 2 days. It is the most sacred gathering of the packs. You must preside. You must be seen. Show them their king is not a broken recluse hiding behind stone walls. Show them you are still the alpha of alphas." He paused, his eyes flicking to Anya again. "And leave this distraction behind." Anya felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. A public appearance. For a man who hid his agony from the world, it sounded like a form of torture. Cassian stood silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Anya could almost feel the war raging within him. To refuse would be to admit weakness, to give credence to Vorlag's insinuations. To accept would be to walk into a viper's nest, exposing himself to endless scrutiny while fighting his inner demons. "I will preside over the festival," Cassian said finally, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "and she will be there, by my side. By my side." Vorlag's eyes widened in genuine shock, followed by a flash of fury. Anya's heart leaped into her throat. By his side? In front of the entire court? It was madness. "You would bring a wolfless girl, a nothing, to the Grand Hall?" Vorlag hissed, his composure cracking. "You would shame our bloodline, our traditions?" "She is under my protection," Cassian stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "That is my final word on the matter. Now leave." Vorlag stared at his nephew, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He gave a stiff, formal bow that was an insult in its precision. "As you command, Your Majesty." He turned, but as he passed Anya, he paused, leaning in close. "Little witch," he whispered, his breath cold against her ear. "Whatever spell you have cast on him, it will not save you. When he falls, you will be the first to burn." Then he was gone, leaving a trail of poison in the air. The moment the door closed, Cassian staggered, one hand bracing against the table. A wave of pain washed over him, more intense than any Anya had seen before. The confrontation with Vorlag had taken a severe toll. "Cassian!" she cried, rushing to his side. He waved her away, his teeth gritted. "It is nothing." But it wasn't nothing. A faint, dark mist seemed to be coiling around his arms, his skin flickering, as if struggling to contain a second, shadowy form within. His eyes glowed with a terrifying light, the gold being consumed by a burning feral red. This was the curse, raw and untamed. "Powers. The book," he gasped, pointing a trembling finger. "Read." She scrambled for the Book of Legends, her hands shaking too badly to hold it steady. His pain was a physical thing in the room, a crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. She began to read, her voice a desperate wavering thread. But the words were not enough. The shadows were too strong this time. Cassian let out a roar of agony, a sound that was half man, half beast, and collapsed to his knees. His body began to contort, his bones cracking and shifting. The dark mist thickened, coalescing around him, his human form dissolving into a monstrous, shifting silhouette of pure shadow and rage. This was the monster of the rumors, the truth behind the Shadow King. His curse didn't just cause him pain, it threatened to unmake him, to turn him into a feral, mindless beast. Fear, cold and absolute, screamed at her to run, to flee this terrifying transformation. Vorlag's words echoed in her mind. "Little witch?" She saw her future in a flash. Exposed, condemned, burned. But then she looked at the writhing form on the floor, at the being inside the storm of shadows, and she did not see a monster. She saw Cassian, the lonely, tormented man who listened to her read, who had caught her when she fell, whose eyes held a universe of pain. Her fear was eclipsed by a fierce, soaring wave of protectiveness. She threw the book aside. Words were not enough. She needed more. Kneeling in front of him, she placed her hands on his heaving shoulders. The shadows recoiled from her touch, hissing like steam on ice. She ignored the burning cold of the dark magic and closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself, past the quiet hum she always felt. To the very wellspring of her power, she pulled on it with all her might, not as a gentle stream, but as a cleansing flood. A brilliant, golden light erupted from her hands, from her very being. It was not the soft glow from the forest. It was a radiant, powerful nova that blasted the shadows back. The room was filled with its pure, warm light, She felt Cassian's tormented body shudder under her palms. She pushed more of her energy into him, a silent scream of defiance against the darkness that sought to claim him. You will not have him. She felt the curse fighting back, a cold, ancient intelligence filled with malice. It tried to seep into her, to corrupt her light, but her power, born of compassion, was its antithesis. She held nothing back, pouring every ounce of her life force into the act of healing, of saving him. Slowly, miraculously, the writhing shadows began to recede. The monstrous form dissolved, and the dark mist evaporated under the force of her light. Cassian's body stilled, the violent transformation halting, then reversing. His human form solidified, the feral red in his eyes fading back to familiar gold. He was left kneeling before her, panting and drenched in sweat, but he was whole. He was himself. The light faded from Anya, leaving her utterly depleted, her vision swimming with black spots. She slumped forward, her strength gone. Before she could fall, Cassian caught her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close. He held her, his breathing ragged against her hair. She felt a tremor run through his powerful frame. Anya, he breathed, his voice thick with awe and disbelief. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. It was reverence. It was wonder. It was a dawning, earth-shattering certainty. "It's you," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "All this time, I thought the legends were just stories, a fool's hope." "What legends?" she murmured, her head spinning with exhaustion. "The legend of the sun gifted," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "A healer whose light could tame the shadow curse of my bloodline. A mate prophesied by the moon herself. My mate." And the word hung in the air, electric and terrifying and wonderful. Mate, the fated bond, the one true pairing of a shifter's soul. It was a concept she had long since given up on. A dream for wolves, not for the wolfless. But as he looked at her, she felt it a deep, resonant thrum in her soul, a chord that vibrated in perfect harmony with him. It had been there all along, a quiet hum beneath the surface, but now, with the revelation, it sang. The pull she had felt, the strange sense of belonging in his arms, the desperate need to save him, it all snapped into focus. Her son. He was her mate, and she, the wolfless broken girl, was the only one in the world who could save him. This realization was more terrifying than any monster, and more beautiful than any dream. The revelation settled over them, changing the very air in the room. Mate. The word was a key, unlocking a depth of feeling in Anya she hadn't known she possessed. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all still there, but now it was underpinned by a powerful, grounding sense of rightness. Looking at Cassian, she no longer saw just a king or a cursed man. She saw her other half, the missing piece of her own soul. Cassian cradled her face in his hands, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce possessiveness. "For 10 years this curse has been my jailer," he said, his voice raw. "It was passed down my line, growing stronger with each generation. My father succumbed to it. He lost himself to the beast within. I have spent every day of my reign fighting it, isolating myself to protect my people from what I could become." He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing for a moment. "And then you fell into my life, a little whisper of light, in an endless darkness. Your presence soothed the beast, even before I knew why. Your touch, Anya, your touch gives me silence. The pain, the rage, it all goes quiet when you are near." Tears welled in Anya's eyes. To be wanted, to be needed, not in spite of what made her different, but because of it, it was a feeling so new, so overwhelming. It threatened to break her. "I thought I was broken," she whispered. "No," he said fiercely, his golden eyes opening to burn into hers. "You were forged, for me." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the tentative, questioning kiss she might have imagined. It was a kiss of desperation and homecoming, of a decade of loneliness and a lifetime of yearning, crashing together in a single, searing moment. It was claiming and surrender, all at once. She melted against him, her exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a fire that matched his own. The mate bond, now acknowledged, flared between them, a tangible current of energy, light, and shadow intertwining. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. The world had shifted on its axis. The solstice festival, Cassian said, his voice now filled with a grim determination she hadn't heard before. Vorlag meant for it to be my undoing. He has been working against me for years, subtly poisoning my reputation, waiting for my curse to consume me so he could seize the throne. He looked at her, his hand still framing her face. He wanted it to be a trap. Now it will be a declaration. "What are you going to do?" she asked, a thrill of fear and excitement running through her. "I am going to walk into that hall with my mate on my arm," he declared. "We will show them what true strength is, not the brute force Vorlag worships, but the balance of light and shadow, of power and healing, of us." It was a terrifying prospect. To stand before the assembled alphas of the entire kingdom, the wolfless girl at the side of the cursed king. They would be ridiculed, challenged. Vorlag would not stand for it, percent. "He will try to hurt you to get to me," Anya said, the thought sending a spike of cold fear through her. "Then I will destroy him," Cassian replied simply, the promise in his eyes as deadly as a winter storm. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Servants appeared with bolts of shimmering fabric, and a royal seamstress was summoned. Anya was bathed and perfumed, her hair woven with silver threads. They dressed her in a gown, the color of the deep twilight sky, a shade that complemented Cassian's formal black attire. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She was no longer a ghost, she was a queen. Throughout it all, Cassian never left her side. He held her hand, his touch a constant, grounding presence. He consulted with Gideon, who looked between the two of them, with a weary but deeply relieved expression. The loyal Beta had known the legend of the sun gifted, but like Cassian, had dismissed it as a desperate hope. Now, seeing them together, seeing the change in his king, he believed. The evening of the festival arrived. The grand hall of the citadel was ablaze with light, filled with the powerful, boisterous energy of hundreds of pack alphas from across the kingdom. The air was thick with the scents of wine, roasting meat, and shifter pride. Anya walked into the hall on Cassian's arm, her head held high, though her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A hush fell over the assembly as they entered. Every eye turned to them. She could feel their shock, their disbelief, their scorn. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Is that a wolfless? The king has taken a broken mate. He is weaker than we thought." Lord Vorlag stood near the throne, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He had expected Cassian to arrive alone and weakened, not proud and defiant with Anya at his side. Cassian led her to the twin thrones on the dais, his grip on her hand unwavering. He did not sit. He stood before the silent, staring crowd, his presence commanding their attention. "Alphas of the kingdom!" His voice boomed, echoing through the vast hall. "For too long, I have ruled from the shadows. You have listened to whispers and rumors, and you have wondered about the strength of your king." He paused, his golden eyes sweeping the crowd. "Tonight I show you the source of my strength. I show you the future of our kingdom." He turned and looked at Anya, his expression softening with a love and reverence that was so profound, so public, it silenced the whispers. "I present to you Anya of the Silver Moon Pack, my fated mate, your future Luna Queen." A stunned, absolute silence greeted his declaration. Then, Vorlag laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the tension. "Your queen?" he sneered, stepping forward. Quote, "You present this flaw as our queen? Nephew, the curse has finally addled your brain. You are unfit to rule." "It is you who are unfit, uncle," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Is it?" Vorlag's eyes glinted with malice. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, dark object, a shard of obsidian that pulsed with a malevolent energy. "You speak of strength, but you are a monster hiding in a man's skin. Let our people see their true king." He pointed the shard at Cassian. A beam of sickening purple light shot out, striking the king in the chest. It was an artifact of dark magic, designed to amplify and unleash the curse. Cassian roared in agony, staggering back. The shadows erupted from him, far more violently than before. The dark mist swirled, and his body began to contort, the horrifying transformation beginning in full view of his entire court. Panic erupted. Alphas scrambled back, drawing weapons, their faces filled with terror. "Behold your king!" Vorlag shouted triumphantly. "A feral beast. He cannot control it. He will destroy us all. Seize the witch who has driven him to this madness." Guards loyal to Vorlag started to move toward the dais, toward Anya, but she did not flinch, she did not run. All her fear was gone, burned away by a blazing, protective love. Cassian was fighting it. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the human intelligence battling against the feral rage the artifact had unleashed. He was trying to protect her, even as the curse tore him apart. He was choosing her over his own agony. And she chose him. She stepped in front of his convulsing form, placing herself between him and Vorlag, between him and the terrified court. She closed her eyes and called to her power, not as a flood, but as a beacon. Anya opened her eyes, and they were glowing with pure, golden light. The light poured from her, not in a violent blast, but in a gentle, radiant wave that expanded to fill the entire hall. It was warm, serene, and unbreakably strong. It washed over the panicking alphas, soothing their fear. It struck Vorlag's obsidian shard, and the dark artifact cracked, then shattered into dust. Most importantly, it enveloped Cassian. The churning shadows of his curse did not hiss or recoil, they stilled, tamed by her light. The agonizing transformation halted. The feral red in his eyes receded. He stood tall, the dark mist swirling harmlessly around him, not as a cage, but as a cloak, held in perfect balance by her radiant power. He was not a man, not a beast, but both, a king of shadow and a king of light, made whole by his mate. The hall was silent, every shifter staring in stunned awe. They had witnessed a miracle. They had seen their king's curse not purged, but mastered. They had seen the truth of the wolfless girl's power. Cassian looked at Anya, his love for her shining in his eyes. Then he turned his gaze to his uncle. With a speed that was inhuman, he crossed the dais and seized Vorlag by the throat, lifting him from the ground. "Treason," Cassian snarled, his voice a blend of human reason and predatory growl. "You tried to break your king. You tried to harm your queen. There is only one punishment for that." There was a sickening crack, and Vorlag went limp in his grasp. Cassian dropped him to the floor and turned back to his people. He stood before them, a figure of immense power, the shadows still swirling around him, but his eyes were clear, his mind his own. At his side, Anya glowed, his perfect balancing counterpart. "I am Cassian, your Alpha King," he declared, his voice ringing with renewed authority. "And this is Anya, my sun-gifted mate, your Luna Queen. Our reign begins now." No one challenged him. An alpha from a powerful northern pack was the first to drop to one knee. Then another, and another, until the entire hall was kneeling. They were not kneeling out of fear, but out of a new, profound respect. They had seen true power that night, not the power to conquer, but the power to heal, to balance, and to unite. The aftermath of the Solstice Festival was a sea change for the entire kingdom. The story of what had happened in the Grand Hall spread like wildfire, carried by the pack alphas to the furthest corners of the realm. The tale grew with each telling, the treacherous uncle, the king's hidden curse, and the miraculous appearance of a sun-gifted queen whose light had tamed the darkness. Anya, the wolfless outcast, became a figure of legend overnight. She was no longer seen as broken, but as blessed. Her soft power, once a source of shame, was now revered as the ultimate strength. In the days that followed, Anya and Cassian moved to solidify their new beginning. Vorlag's conspirators were rounded up by Gideon, their treason exposed. Most were exiled, stripped of their titles. Cassian was firm, but he was not needlessly cruel. Guided by Anya's compassionate influence, he offered mercy where it was warranted, a move that won him more loyalty than any execution could have. The harsh, militant culture of the court began to soften, like hard winter ground thawing in the spring Sunday. Anya's family was summoned to the citadel. Her father, Ronan arrived expecting to be showered with honors, his chest puffed with a stolen pride. He prostrated himself before the throne, already dreaming of the power he would now wield as the queen's father. "Your Majesties," he began, his voice slick with false reverence,